So for those of you who might not be familiar with us, CMS is a small boutique-based IT consulting company here in Toronto. We've got about 40 consultants now? Right, yeah. Growing. I think when I started 2 years ago, we had like 20. So we're up to 40 now. Really focused on Microsoft technologies. So we're a gold partner in five companies on the gold side. Desktop, management, virtualization, messaging, communication, collaboration. And that's really kind of where we focus our things. We do some Citrix work. We're also a Citrix partner in certain instances where that kind of fits with our customer needs. But we're really focused on designing, deploying, and operating Microsoft infrastructure. That's kind of our key thing. We do cover a variety of different practice areas. And some of those practice areas have sort of split out into additional businesses that we run. Really on the collaboration side, we see that kind of as Exchange, Link, voice, communications, Office 365, things like that. The data center side of things, that's really what we're going to talk about a lot today. Data center, desktop, and cloud. And that's where we see, the System Center suite, along with things like Windows Server 2012, and a lot of the technologies that we have in those areas really allowing you to better manage your data center and start providing things like automation, self-service, and those cloud type of services to your organization. The desktop side of things, we do quite a bit of Windows deployments. We were the worldwide partner of the year for Windows deployment in 2011, correct? Just before I got here, or just after I got here. And this is really kind of one of the core things that we do here. We've actually seen quite an uptick in Windows 7 interest in the last month. Surprise, surprise, there's less than a year left to get off of XP. And so all these people are waking up and saying, I need to get on this Windows 7 thing. And I guess maybe some people waited for Windows 8, weren't too excited with what they saw there, and so Windows 7 is where they're going. And then on the cloud thing, this is really kind of where we've seen a lot of change in the last, probably in the last year, and coming into the next 6 months, again, some more significant change on the cloud side of things. This is everything from Azure Infrastructure Services now, released at MMS in April. So things like VM in the cloud, Active Directory in the cloud, and enhancing some of the other cloud technologies like your web applications that might be running in Azure or Office 365. And then on the private cloud side of things, so again, some significant changes around System Center 2012, some of the capabilities in Windows Server 2012, and what you're going to see in the next few months with System Center 2012 R2 and Windows Server 2012 R2 that are scheduled for like September, October time frame for release. But it's really kind of built on the core platform and security. When we get into the different sort of cloud scenarios, what we'll see is there's really kind of a very similar set of tools, what you see in on-prem as what you'd see in the cloud. And there's a couple of different variations of cloud, as we'll see throughout the day. Really, software as a service is probably one that everybody's familiar with, whether you know it or not. I've had a Hotmail account, a Gmail account for years, and that's software as a service, right? Everything's running up in the cloud. You log into your web browser, you've got a client on your desktop. And this is really kind of built on now and spread into the enterprise space. Things like Office 365, Link Online, SharePoint, Exchange, and even now with Office 2013, having an online version of Office where you can view and edit and create documents online without having any sort of desktop software required other than a browser. And if you take a look at some of the numbers around cloud adoption, in 2012, private hosted cloud solutions from Gartner were targeted around $100 million per year being spent on these private cloud type of solutions. By 2016, they see that being nearly $500 million a year. So some real growth expected in that area. And it gets actually even bigger on the software as a service side when we take a look at things like infrastructure as a service. Now, infrastructure as a service today is around a $36 million business. And so that's like Azure, that Azure infrastructure, Amazon, EC2, things like Rackspace and some of their private cloud type offerings or infrastructure as a service type offerings. That's expected to grow to about $250 million in the next 4 years. Platform as a service, when we talk about platform as a service, we're really talking about things like the app fabric and Windows Azure for applications. So the traditional sort of where Azure started and where it's come from as far as, hosting websites, SQL backends, applications written in .NET, maybe leveraging some other services like Bing Maps or other third-party services. And we take a look at this business today, it's around a $50 million business. 2 reasons for that. One, there's not a lot of adoption there. It's still, while you can run your website easily in Azure, it still takes a developer to say, hey, you know what, I think this is a good idea, and write their app or write their website to load it up on Azure. So there's a little bit of a delay there as far as developer adoption and developers coming around to this idea of rewriting their websites and putting them up online. And that's expected to grow though in the next 4 years to around 150 million. So this is probably going to be the slowest moving one because it does take time for developers to kind of come around. Having worked in a development shop, that side of the business seems to be one of the slowest sides to change. There's a whole bunch of things there that they haven't even gotten their head around yet. Outside of this whole idea of cloud computing. The last thing here then is infrastructure as a service. When we take a look at infrastructure as a service, we'll see a lot of very similar things as to what we have today. So Hyper-V, Windows Server, those are infrastructure services that we have today. And if we take a look at Windows Azure, Azure is now based and built completely on Windows Server 2012. So prior to the release of Server 2012, a lot of those technologies and features and functionalities that were being released into Azure were trickling down into Windows Server 2008 and R2 and Service Pack 1. With 2012 and the release of Windows Server 2012, Azure runs on Windows Server 2012. It's using Hyper-V 2012. They're managing it with System Center. And so a lot of the technologies that you use to build your private cloud are being used to build Microsoft's public cloud, and what we'll see in the next, especially in the next iteration with R2 of the System Center 2012, is starting to tie these things together, and this idea of a hybrid cloud, where you've got some services, physical and virtual on-prem, some services running virtually in Azure, Rackspace, Rackforce, maybe even at some point Amazon, and really kind of tying together those different cloud type offerings. The real kind of key to that is management. And there's really kind of a number of different discussion points that come with this. Is, one of the nice things about getting this infrastructure off-prem into the cloud is a lot of people think, well, I don't need to manage it anymore. It's running up in a data center somewhere. Microsoft has their IT team working on it and managing those systems. And that's true to a point, but there is still some management that needs to be taken care of. It might not be traditional management, might be more along the operationalizing of these systems. And this is where we kind of talk about, VM sprawl. It's very easy, as we'll see as we get into the demos, to spin up virtual machines in a private or public cloud type solution. You have access to the portal, you request the machine, 20 minutes later your machine is running. Faster if it's in Azure. And we'll see here we can get a VM loaded up, running, and logged into Azure in under 5 minutes. And so VM sprawl becomes a big challenge in controlling that. And there's a number of ways, as we'll see, to control how we provision those machines, who can provision those machines, and some of the workflows and approval strategies that we put in place there to manage that sprawl of VMs. It was one thing, years and years ago where you just ran out of physical space, and we couldn't add any more machines. It's very difficult to run out of physical space, in these, $100 million data centers that they're building. when everything's virtualized. And the other side of things is as we start to build these virtual networks and these hybrid type scenarios where we're tying in on-premises services with cloud-based systems, remote users, local users, we start to get into a lot of moving parts, and these solutions get very, very complex. And when an issue occurs, well, is it the web front end that's sitting up in Azure? Is it the database backend that's sitting on premises? Is it the network that we've got connecting our cloud? Is it an issue somewhere in this data center where our service is running? And then we also get things like single sign-on issues and federation challenges, and it really becomes a very complex solution. And so monitoring this type of solution and trying to identify where we might see bottlenecks or where issues are starting to arise before they become sort of critical issues really becomes key to this scenario. And this is again where kind of System Center ties in, and really the kind of three pillars of System Center really kind of tie together and bring this solution into play. And this again with Azure and with the 2012 solution, really kind of being able to build this hybrid type of solution. And when we talk about private cloud, there's a number of different ideas that come into play. Typically when we talk about private cloud, people think of virtualization, being able to go to a portal, request a virtual machine, have somebody approve and have that virtual machine automatically deployed, all with a few clicks and approval emails and things like that. But when we really think of like the key tenets of private cloud being self-service, usage-based, elastic, we can start to see some of these components come into play on the application side of things, definitely in service delivery, and then also infrastructure management. We take for example, it's very common and everybody kind of understands this private cloud solution of going and requesting a virtual machine, but there's nothing that would stop you from replacing or requesting a virtual machine with requesting an application or requesting a new hire. A lot of these types of workflows and processes can be automated, can be self-service, and can be very elastic in how they're deployed. There is no difference to the end user if they're requesting a virtual machine or they're requesting an application to be deployed to their desktop. It's the same components, it's the same tool set. And this is what we'll see when we get through the day is how how private cloud can mean more than just virtual machines, because a lot of people are just like, well, I'm not going to give my end users the ability to request a virtual machine. There's no need for that. If somebody needs a machine for anything, they can call IT and IT will take care of it. But things like HR, we've done a number of these types of implementations using Service Manager and Orchestrator to build out these HR solutions so that a user in HR who knows nothing about IT can go in and say, on this date, Brian is starting on April 1st. He needs a computer, he's working in sales, he needs a phone, Active Directory account, Exchange, link, all this kind of stuff. IT doesn't need to know any of that. They just say, hey, Brian's starting on this date, this is his salary, this is his department, and click submit. And from that point on, emails get sent out to payroll saying, hey, Brian's starting on this date. Here's all the information you need to know to set up his account in payroll. The building maintenance gets an email saying, hey, you know what? This guy's starting on this date. He needs a desk. He needs a desk phone. Maybe a chair. Clean it up. Whatever needs to be done there. And the same thing, into IT saying, hey, he's going to need a notebook. He's going to need a phone. And then some of that stuff can be automated. So we don't need somebody anymore to go into Active Directory and create that account and create an Exchange mailbox and provision a link account. That can all be done automatically. And so Orchestrator can pick off some of those pieces and say, hey, you know what? I'll create the account. I'll create the mailbox. I'll create the link, the link client, and HR can just pop into the console every so often and say, hey, how's that going? Is it ready to go? And we can set off triggers and alerts and things like that. And so we've got that ability to really expand what the idea of a private cloud is. And when we start taking a look at some of the new hybrid cloud scenarios that Microsoft's coming out with, things like Hyper-V Recovery Manager. We were at MMS, and then there was a private partner Microsoft event, and then they released this at Tech Ed. Hyper-V Recovery Manager is really, from a DR perspective, a very simple and effective way of building a DR solution. We need 2 data centers. So you have your data center here on-prem, and we've got another data center at another location. Running Hyper-V, running BMM, and a simple cloud-based service in Azure, which allows us to, if something were to happen in this building here, log into the Azure portal from anywhere. You can log into it from your iPad at the train station. You can log into it from your phone. You can log into it from your computer at home, and click the DR button and flip everything over to your DR center. And it's a very powerful solution. We start to see more and more things like this coming, outside of the traditional, virtual machine provisioning type of scenarios. And that's really kind of what we're going to see today. For the rest of the day, session 1 is really kind of focused on, what are these different type of cloud solutions from a public, private, and hybrid cloud scenario. How do they work? How do they tie together? What are the components that you need to build these types of solutions? And then after that, we kind of dig into the desktop and data center side of things, going a little bit deeper on some of the desktop management best practices, some of the cloud solutions that appear there, things like application self-service, Intune, managing non-domain joined devices or remote devices with Intune, and things like Azure integration into Configuration Manager with Azure distribution points and where some of those different components might make sense. The data center side of things, same thing, really kind of focusing on data center management. So some of the self-service things that we can do outside of virtual machine provisioning. I think we're going to walk through like the HR type of scenario of a new hire, and taking a look at sort of the service delivery side of things with Service Manager, the automation side of things with Orchestrator, and then when we tie all these different things together, you'll see it's a fairly complex solution. It's a live environment that we're using. It's around 20 to 25 virtual machines that we've got running. It's a fairly complex solution, monitoring that becomes key. And so we'll take a look at how we can use Operations Manager to monitor this environment. What are some of the reports that we can get back, and also delve into a little bit of our, I guess you could call it a hybrid cloud managed service where we manage infrastructure here using sort of an on-prem SCOM server in your organization, and how that'll work. There'll be some closing remarks, probably where Brian will come in again and share some wisdom. And then we've got cocktail hour. So we've got beer and wine cooling in the fridge, and we'll have some more food as well. I hope you're hungry, because they usually bring in lots of food for these events. So I know we've got a hot lunch coming. And I think what I'll do is I'll just keep going. We'll get into the next session right away, and then let Brian sort of come in just before lunch. Oh, is he here? Oh, they let him off the train.
Howdy, everybody.
So I just kind of ran through sort of the thing, but I didn't include your thoughts because they're your thoughts.
Oh, okay.
So I'll let you share your thoughts.
I apologize to everyone. It took me an hour and 55 minutes to arrive here this morning, and I only live 20 minutes away. So it's been a long morning already. But so welcome. Thanks everybody for making it down here to the office. I guess Rodney, you gave them the brief on the building, the facilities, all the rest. Did you go through like the IDC numbers and that kind of stuff?
A little bit.
A little bit?
Kind of left over your thoughts.
Okay.
I covered off high level.
I don't even need those. I'll run through the thoughts that I kind of wanted to share anyways. Really the thoughts I wanted to share were kind of my thoughts on market adoption of the cloud services, the various cloud services. And I was just going to take them in order, really, the SaaS, so software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. I think when you see the IDC growth numbers, I think Rodney did share them, did he? Or you guys nod, yeah? You'll see software as a service is going to continue to grow. My view on that is people will adopt it at such time as they normally replace a business application. So nobody's going to say, hey, there's a new application delivery mechanism, let's go replace all our apps. But what they will do is at such time as an application is normally end of life or needs replacing or there's a new business need, they'll consider a software as a service offering as a good way to replace that app. So that means that there's not going to be any wholesale switch of apps, but they're starting to trickle in. I'm going to bet everybody here has already a provider or two in the SaaS space. Is that about right? Today, maybe you're using Federation or in single sign-on, or maybe you're managing separate sets of IDs. As you start to add many SaaS providers, you're going to have an increase in infrastructure needs to handle all these multiple SaaS providers. So things like Federation services are going to become important, and things around the management, around viewing what the user experience is and who's at fault if it's not perfect is going to become important. So if the user says, hey, I'm going to do my business application and the experience isn't good, well, is that a routing issue, an internet issue, a cloud provider issue, a Federation issue, some of your backend that it draws from, etc. Right? So I think what I think SaaS is going to drive is more importance to what I call the glue layer. Right? So I think that's what's going to happen there. Platform as a service, that's an interesting space, and I think the big players have to make a long play there and do the right thing. But if we think developers are all going to go and retool and reschool on learning how to write cloud-enabled apps for everything overnight, that's not likely to happen. So that's going to be a long play out. Eventually it'll get there, and kind of only the big boys will play. And if you look at IDC's numbers in the platform as a service space, the growth there, I'm arguing with them, is that because they still include things like Azure VM in that number, they haven't broken those out. So when they actually look at the pure platform plays from VMware, Amazon, Microsoft, etc., that's going to be a much smaller growth number. And then the infrastructure as a service is, of course, the thing that impacts my life most, is CMS being an infrastructure company. Interestingly enough, I see that being the space for most change. So I usually tell this story. Back in 2005, I think the whole infrastructure stuff is very analogous to virtualization. So in 2005, Microsoft commissioned us to write this, they called it the Inspire Workshop Series. And it was like a 5-day everything Microsoft infrastructure course. And we ran across the country and delivered that. And I would say in 2005, at least 50% of the audience didn't even really know what virtualization was or hadn't touched it before. In small towns, that number was probably 80%. In big cities, maybe lower, but I'm going to average it out there anecdotally. Roll forward probably only 5 years from that to 2010, and it was probably more like 80 to 90% had virtualization deployed, probably today 100%, right, or damn close. In virtualization, well, we all went out and pitched virtualization around machine portability, and we pitched it around the green story and all the neat stuff virtualization lets you do around DR, etc. But I don't ever recall a single customer saying, hey, I have a brand new $20,000 server and I'm going to turn it off to save cooling. Nobody did that, unfortunately. What happened was people waited till it hit end of life, and then they said, hey, if I don't need to buy 50 of those $20,000 boxes, but I can buy 10, because in the early days you weren't getting a great consolidation ratio, that's what you did, right? And all that fringe benefits is what came along. So I think that is fairly analogous to what we're going to see in infrastructure as a service offerings as well. There's going to be not a lot of move to it until that hardware refresh cycle is going to help drive it. And then if you think of how virtualization got driven, people didn't say, hey, okay, now I can buy like 1/10 the boxes, so let's switch our whole data center. What they did was they said, hey, this virtualization thing's kind of neat and interesting. Let's go switch test and dev. Hey, that worked pretty well. Let's go move some low priority production, that box that can be down for a few days, but we can't really kill yet, that kind of stuff. And then they eventually went full out production, and I think we're going to see a very similar kind of adoption on the infrastructure as a service offerings. And that's just, my opinion. But I think when we look at things, they're fairly new. EC2's been around for a while from Amazon. VMware is certainly working on their cloud offerings largely through their hosters. And Microsoft earlier this year, I guess it was at MMS actually, they announced their Azure VM, so it's pretty early days. Since then, they have in customer preview mode their disaster recovery, what do they call it? Their recovery manager, which at this point purely orchestrates from Azure failover from one of your data centers to another one of your data centers. Like, so Hyper-V VM replication, it'll replicate the VMs all the time and then re-IP them, rename them, whatever it needs to do. But you're going to see that develop really quickly. You're going to be able to replicate your VMs up to Azure, not just to another one of your data centers. Eventually, once your data center's extended there anyways, maybe you start throwing some test and dev boxes up there. Hey, that maybe works pretty good. Let's throw some low priority production up there. Hey, that worked pretty good. So I think that's going to be the interesting part to watch over the next 3 years to 5 years is going to be infrastructure as a service offerings. And not just the simple stuff like cheap, bulky storage, which you can get there today pretty good, but things like really, truly extending your data center. So today, of course, early days, there's some technical challenges around how do you extend your data center in a safe and secure manner, and what am I going to worry about with data sovereignty issues, et cetera, and those will all come into play. But that's kind of what I'm seeing. And so how does that tie into the whole management story? Well, certainly I think the management story from Microsoft is what's really kind of important in what I call that glue layer, right? So, you know, I guess you could say infrastructure, it's getting simpler. The storage is being virtualized. You have software-defined networks that are being virtualized. You're actually getting to the point now where if you start to build a real private cloud offering inside your organization, you'll never really know where a VM sits because it'll dynamically move host to host, right? Based on performance. So maybe that whole infrastructure layer is going away because it's getting so simple. And I'm thinking that the complexity is maybe moving up a layer. Because now what's happened is we have something like 50 to 1, I think, is current IDC numbers of servers to administrators as a industry average, and that's obviously skewed because it covers enterprise to small business. But that average, 5-6 years ago, is closer to 20, right? So you got more VMs per admin. You have more complexity as we have, federation. Complex networks, software-defined networks that are extending to the cloud. And so having a really tight management tool that can view all of it, help you narrow down quickly where problems are going to happen, and being able to manage all that. Certainly, just patching is a simple thing, but you're going to have to patch things that are, if you extend your data center becomes a much bigger area to patch kind of thing. So all that compliance issues are going to drive management as well. So that was the really high speed, probably middle section that that I was supposed to deliver, but if I hadn't spent 2 hours on the subway. But yeah, so I'm happy to kind of take that as a challenge to talk over lunch or the end of the day stuff, share your thoughts. You're welcome to disagree with me or have different market predictions. I always enjoy that. But yeah, so that's my thought. I think
we disagree with them all the time.
Yeah, I pay extra for that. So yeah, we'll take a break.
Yeah, sure, we'll take a break.